I am Julian, 32 years old. 3 months ago, my wife walked into my workplace break room and handed me divorce papers, while my boss stood right behind her with a smirk on his face. While I was covered in warehouse dust, physically broken from working double shifts to stretch my meager salary to pay for the lifestyle she demanded, my own wife looked me dead in the eye and said she was leaving me for someone who could actually provide. They stood there, humiliating me in front of my coworkers, acting like my life was a joke they were both in on. But there is one thing they didn't know. I had just inherited $470 million, including the controlling stake in the very company my boss thought he ran. And right now, they have lost absolutely everything and are begging for my forgiveness. Before I tell you exactly what happened and how I took everything from them, hit that like button if you believe that karma always comes to collect. And don't forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Now, let's go back to the moment my old life ended and my new one began. The vending machine in the employee break room at Harwick Distribution took my $4 and gave me absolutely nothing back. That was the detail my mind decided to focus on. Not the flickering fluorescent light above the third loading bay that had been giving me a migraine since Tuesday. Not the smell of diesel exhaust, stale coffee, and cheap industrial cleaner that soaked into my skin so deeply after every 9-hour shift that I could never scrub it off. Not the dull, persistent, agonizing ache in my lower back that had been my constant companion for the last 5 years of heavy lifting. It was the machine, for dollars gone. A blinking red error code where my stale, overpriced turkey sandwich should have been. I stood there staring at the smudged glass, watching the metal coil hold my sandwich hostage. I was trying to decide if I had the physical and emotional energy to hunt down the building manager to demand my refund. I was rationing my meals that week. I had $22 left in my checking account to last until Friday because Penelope had needed her luxury gym membership renewed. Before I could hit the coin return button again, the heavy metal door of the break room swung open. I heard the shoes first. It was the sharp, confident, aggressive click-clack of expensive heels striking cheap, scuffed linoleum. Penelope did not own shoes that sounded like that. I knew our budget intimately. I knew every dime that went out of our joint account. I tracked the spreadsheets late at night while she slept. The shoes I heard crossing the floor did not belong to the inventory of our life together. I turned around slowly, wiping grease off my hands with a paper towel. Penelope was standing there. She was wearing a tailored charcoal blazer I had never seen before, paired with a silk blouse that practically screamed high-end boutique. Her hair was styled perfectly, the way she usually did it when her parents dragged us to their country club events where I was paraded around as the disappointing son-in-law. In her left hand, she gripped a thick manila envelope, but the most striking thing was her face. It was completely calm. It was not the peaceful calm of someone content with life. It was the cold, calculated, terrifying calm of a woman who had rehearsed this exact moment in the mirror 100 times. She had dressed up for an execution. My execution. And she did not come alone. Standing right behind her, leaning casually against the aluminum doorframe like he owned the building and everyone inside it, was Victor. Victor was the director of regional operations for Harwick Distribution. He was 45 years old, always wore custom-tailored suits that communicated old money, and he had spent the last 3 years making my work life a living nightmare. He was the kind of boss who stole credit for your logistics plans, denied your time-off requests with a smile, and called you buddy or champ in a tone that made you want to put your fist through a cinder block wall. He was standing behind my wife in my break room, smiling. Penelope walked up to the scuffed plastic table in the center of the room. She slid the envelope across the table. The sound of the heavy paper scraping against the plastic seemed incredibly loud in the sudden quiet of the room. "Julian," she said. Her voice was entirely flat, devoid of any affection, any history, any regret. "We need to do this today." I looked down at the envelope. I looked up at her perfectly contoured face. "Do what, Penelope? Don't make this harder than it has to be," she said, crossing her arms over her chest, creating a physical barrier between us. "I am tired. I am done waiting for a life you clearly cannot give me." I reached out and flipped the flap of the envelope open. I pulled out the thick stack of papers. Petition for dissolution of marriage. I saw my full legal name printed at the top in stark black ink. I saw the county seal. I scanned down to the bottom of the first page and saw the date. She had signed this 2.5 weeks ago. For nearly 3 weeks, she had been sleeping in my bed. She had been eating the dinners I cooked. She had kissed my cheek in the mornings, all while carrying this paperwork in her designer purse, planning exactly how to drop the guillotine on my neck. The break room had gone dead quiet. Toby and Marcus, two of the guys from my shift who were usually loud and joking near the coffee pot, had frozen. They suddenly developed a deep, intense fascination with the floor tiles. Marcus, a tough guy in his 50s, actually looked pale. He knew what was happening. Victor pushed off the door frame. He took 2 slow, deliberate steps into the room, slipping his hands into the pockets of his tailored slacks. He wanted to be part of the frame. He wanted to make sure everyone saw him claiming the prize. "You brought him here," I stated. My voice didn't shake. I was surprised by that. It wasn't a question. "I needed you to actually receive the papers in person," Penelope said, her eyes flicking to Victor for a brief second to draw confidence from him before returning her cold gaze to me. "You have a habit of avoiding things you don't want to deal with, Julian. Like your dead-end salary. Like your lack of ambition. I am 31 years old. I deserve more than a guy who comes home smelling like cardboard boxes and sweat every single night. Victor can give me the life I was supposed to have." Victor gave me that trademark half-smile. The look of a man who had already run the numbers, assessed his opponent, and knew he had secured the absolute victory. He wanted me to react. He wanted me to scream. I could see it in his eyes. He was praying I would throw a punch, break his nose, or throw a chair across the room. If I did that, he could call HR, terminate my employment immediately for workplace violence, and have me arrested by the local police all in one afternoon. He wanted to strip me of my wife, my job, and my freedom in a single devastating stroke. I looked at the divorce papers. I looked at the county seal. I looked at Penelope's cold, dead eyes, realizing that the woman I had loved for 5 years had never actually existed. She was just a parasite waiting for a better host. Then I did the absolute last thing either of them expected. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I didn't ask why. I reached into the chest pocket of my dirty uniform shirt and pulled out a cheap blue plastic pen. I flipped past the asset division pages, which were laughable considering I had nothing left, turned to the final signature page, pressed the paper flat against the table, and signed my name on the dotted line. Penelope blinked. Her posture slipped. That caught her entirely off guard. The smugness on Victor's face faltered for a fraction of a second. His brow furrowed. They had brought an audience. They had brought the paperwork. They had wanted a theatrical display of my destruction. I simply clicked my pen shut, slid it back into my pocket, and pushed the paperwork back across the table toward her. "Have your lawyer file it whenever you are ready," I said, keeping my voice lower than normal. I turned my back on them. I walked over to the vending machine, slammed the coin return button one last time just on principle. It still gave me nothing, and walked to the lockers. I grabbed my worn canvas jacket. "Julian," Penelope started, her voice suddenly unsure, lacking the rehearsed venom from a moment ago. "I hope you understand that I understand everything," I interrupted, not looking back. I looked straight at Victor. "Keep her. You deserve each other." I pushed through the break room doors. I walked across the massive warehouse floor, past the towering racks of inventory, past the flickering light above Bay 3, and pushed through the heavy metal exit doors. I clocked out. I walked into the parking lot. The harsh autumn wind hit my face. It was cold, clean, and completely indifferent to the fact that my entire life had just been dismantled. I got into my beat-up, 10-year-old truck. The engine sputtered before finally catching. I sat there for exactly 11 minutes watching the dashboard clock tick. I didn't cry. I just felt a hollow, echoing emptiness. I put the truck in drive and navigated the familiar streets back to the house we rented in a decent, middle-class neighborhood. When I walked through the front door, the silence was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that only exists when half of a life has been violently ripped out of a space. I walked upstairs to the master bedroom. Her closet was two-thirds empty. The expensive dresses, the designer bags I had gone into debt to buy her for anniversaries, the jewelry boxes, all gone. The bathroom counter on her side was wiped completely clean, save for a single black hair tie she had missed. She had planned this exit meticulously. I walked back downstairs to the kitchen. I made a pot of cheap coffee. I sat at the small wooden dining table. There was a stack of unopened mail sitting on the edge of the table. I had been ignoring it for 2 weeks because I knew it was just utility bills and credit card statements I couldn't afford to pay. But sitting there, with my marriage officially dead and my job likely gone by Monday, I figured I had nothing left to fear from a piece of paper. I pulled the stack toward me. At the very bottom, hidden beneath a final notice from the electric company, was a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was made of heavy, expensive parchment paper. It had my full legal name printed across the front in a sharp, formal serif font. The return address was an elite law firm located downtown in the financial district. Harrison and Associates. I slid my thumb under the flap and ripped it open. I unfolded the heavy letterhead. I read the first paragraph. Then I read it again. My breath caught in my throat. The kitchen seemed to tilt on its axis. I thought the worst was over. I thought the universe had finished torturing me for the day. I was so incredibly wrong. The game hadn't even started yet. To understand exactly how twisted that moment in the break room really was, and why my wife felt so comfortable executing me in public, you have to understand the family I married into. Penelope was the golden child. Her parents, Richard and Martha, were the kind of people who judged your entire human worth by your zip code, your job title, and the brand of the watch on your wrist. They lived in a sprawling house in a gated community, attended all the right HOA meetings, and treated me like a stray dog Penelope had foolishly dragged in from the rain. When I first met Penelope in our mid-20s, she wasn't like them. At least I didn't think she was. She seemed grounded. She seemed to appreciate my hard work. But over our 5 years of marriage, the mask slowly slipped, revealing the exact replica of her mother hiding underneath. The constant, draining comparisons started. The subtle digs at family dinners became a weekly ritual. I remember last Thanksgiving with painful clarity. It was the moment I should have realized my marriage was over, but I was too blind and exhausted to see it. We were sitting around Richard's massive, custom-built mahogany dining table. The crystal glasses gleamed under the chandelier. I had just worked 65 hours that week at the warehouse, picking up overtime shifts to afford Penelope's new luxury gym membership and the designer coat she claimed she absolutely needed for the winter. I was running on 4 hours of sleep, my joints aching with every movement. Richard poured himself a glass of $300 wine, took a sip, looked directly at me across the turkey, and sighed heavily. "So, Julian," Richard projected his voice, loud enough for the entire extended family to stop their conversations and listen. "Still moving heavy boxes around at the warehouse? Still wearing steel-toed boots to earn a living?" I forced a polite smile. "Yes, Richard. The logistics division is expanding. I'm hoping to apply for the shift manager position next quarter." Martha let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. "A shift manager. How quaint. Julian, I saw Victor pulling out of his driveway the other day in that brand new Porsche 911. A truly beautiful machine. Takes real ambition and intellect to drive a car like that. You should take notes from men like him." "Penelope, honey, hasn't Victor been given another promotion?" Penelope didn't defend me. She didn't reach for my hand under the table. She just took a delicate sip of her wine, her eyes gleaming. "Yes, Mom. He's the regional director now. He handles millions in corporate accounts." I sat there, staring at my plate, letting them strip away my dignity piece by piece. That was the dynamic. I was the workhorse. I funded her lifestyle. I maxed out my personal credit cards for her spa vacations with her friends. I even quietly drained the small college fund I had aggressively started for the kids we planned to have. $20,000 wiped out in a month. just to pay off a massive, secret shopping debt she had accumulated. I took the extra shifts. I took the physical abuse at work. I swallowed my pride every single day because I believed, stupidly, that marriage was built on sacrifice. But looking back at that Thanksgiving, the signs of her affair with Victor were flashing neon red. The late-night strategy meetings, she claimed, she had to attend for her own mid-level corporate job. The sudden, obsessive interest in high-end fashion that I definitely wasn't paying for. The way she would quickly lock her phone screen the second I walked into our bedroom, clutching the device to her chest. I ignored my gut because I was too exhausted to face the truth. I thought if I just worked harder, if I just secured that management promotion, I could finally earn her respect and fix us. I was a pathetic fool, but that fool died the second I opened that cream-colored envelope in my kitchen. The letter was from an attorney named Arthur Harrison. It was brief, highly formal, and requested my immediate presence at his downtown office regarding the final estate execution of Raymond Dale. Raymond Dale, my uncle. I had not seen Uncle Raymond in 20 years. He was the absolute black sheep of my mother's family. While my parents valued loud opinions and constant complaining, Raymond was a quiet, intense, solitary man who had alienated everyone by refusing to conform. He made his money in early technology acquisitions and aggressive commercial real estate, but he lived like a monk. The very last time I saw him was at my mother's funeral. I was 12 years old. I remember standing in the freezing rain near the open grave, shivering in a cheap, rented black suit that was 2 sizes too big for me. My relatives were busy performing their grief for the audience. Raymond had walked past all of them, ignoring their whispers. He stopped in front of me, put a heavy, warm hand on my shoulder, and looked me dead in the eyes. "Tears won't build a roof, Julian," he had said, his voice gravelly and low. He slipped a folded $50 bill into my jacket pocket. "Never let them see you break. Use this well." Then he turned and walked away. He vanished from my life completely. No phone calls, no holiday cards, nothing for 2 decades. Now, 20 years later, I was sitting in my kitchen holding a letter from his elite estate lawyer. The next morning, I didn't go to the warehouse. I put on the only decent suit I owned, a cheap polyester blend I bought for a wedding 3 years ago, and drove downtown. The law firm of Harrison and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a massive glass skyscraper in the financial district. The lobby smelled of expensive leather, polished Italian marble, and serious money. A receptionist in a sharp designer suit guided me into a massive conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city skyline. Mr. Harrison walked in 5 minutes later. He was an older man, maybe late 60s, with sharp, calculating eyes and silver hair. He carried a thick, leather-bound binder. He didn't waste time with small talk or false sympathy. He sat down at the head of the long walnut table, opened the binder, and looked directly at me. "Julian," Mr. Harrison said, his voice completely level, the tone of a man accustomed to delivering life-altering news. "Your Uncle Raymond passed away 3 weeks ago. He suffered a sudden cardiac event. As you may know, he had no children and no surviving spouse." I nodded slowly, feeling out of place in my cheap suit. "I barely knew him, Mr. Harrison. I haven't seen him since I was a kid." "He knew enough about you," Harrison replied smoothly. "He kept tabs. He had a private investigator check in on your life every few years. He admired your work ethic, even if he didn't admire your choice in a spouse. Julian, you are his sole heir." I sat back in my plush leather chair. I was expecting a few $1,000s, maybe 10 grand, enough to clear Penelope's lingering credit card debt that she had stuck me with, and maybe put a down payment on a small, cheap apartment to start my life over. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What exactly did he leave behind?" "Some property." Mr. Harrison turned a heavy page in his binder. "Your uncle spent 40 years building a highly aggressive private investment portfolio, a diversified collection of commercial real estate in major metropolitan areas, several offshore tech holdings, and a massive amount of liquid assets sitting in high-yield trusts. The total value of the estate, After all federal and state taxes have been cleared, he paused, adjusting his glasses, is approximately $470 million. The room completely stopped. The air conditioning hummed, but it sounded like a jet engine in my ears. The city skyline outside the window seemed to blur. $470 million. The number was so absurdly large, so entirely out of the realm of human comprehension, that my brain simply refused to process it. Just yesterday I was staring at a vending machine, furious over a stolen $4 sandwich, rationing my meals. "There is a mistake," I whispered. "There is no mistake, Mr. Dale," Harrison said firmly. "The funds are fully authenticated. They are yours." I gripped the arms of the chair. I don't. "There is one more thing," Mr. Harrison continued, sliding a specific, heavily notarized document across the polished wood table toward me. "Your uncle was a silent majority investor in a number of massive holding companies. His largest single asset, the crown jewel of his portfolio, is a 63% controlling equity stake in a logistics conglomerate." I looked down at the paper. I read the name printed at the top of the organizational chart. Harwick Group Holdings. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack the bone. Harwick Group Holdings. That was the parent company. That was the massive corporate umbrella that owned Harwick Distribution. That was the entity that owned the concrete warehouse I slaved in. That was the company that paid Victor's inflated executive salary. Victor was the director of regional operations. He answered to the regional VP, who answered to the CEO, who answered to the board of directors. And as of this exact second, looking at this piece of paper, I owned the board. I was sitting in a leather chair, wearing a cheap suit, holding a legal document that made me the absolute, undisputed owner of the ground my cheating wife's lover walked on. I could pick up the phone right now, call HR, and fire him. I could make one phone call and have security drag Victor out of his pristine corner office and toss him onto the street. The urge to do it was overwhelming. The anger burned hot and bright in my chest. "Do you want me to initiate the formal transfer of power immediately?" Mr. Harrison asked, watching me closely, his eyes sharp. "We can call an emergency board meeting this afternoon." I looked out the window at the city below. I thought about Victor's smug smile in the break room. I thought about the divorce papers. I thought about Richard praising Victor's Porsche while mocking my steel-toed boots. If I fired Victor today, he would just find another high-paying corporate job. He would spin a story about a hostile takeover. Penelope would just find another rich host to leech off of. Firing him wasn't enough. I didn't want him unemployed. I wanted him destroyed. I needed to take everything he valued, tear down his reputation, and salt the earth so nothing could ever grow there again. "No," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous calm. "I need 90 days. Keep the ownership transfer completely sealed. Do not file it publicly yet. Nobody at Harwick can know about this." Mr. Harrison leaned back, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. He closed the thick leather binder. He understood exactly what I was doing. I left the law office as a ghost with $500 million and unlimited resources. I drove back to my empty rented house, and for the first time in 5 years, I slept like a dead man. The storm was gathering, but I was going to be the one controlling the lightning. The hardest, most agonizing part of possessing absolute power is pretending that you don't. Monday morning, my alarm went off at 4:30 a.m. I rolled out of bed, put my heavy steel-toed boots back on, and buttoned up my faded, sweat-stained blue Harwick uniform shirt. I drove my sputtering truck into the massive Harwick distribution parking lot, walked through the employee entrance, and punched my time card. Walking onto the warehouse floor felt entirely surreal. I looked up at the 50-foot ceilings. I looked at the fleets of forklifts, the endless miles of pallet racking, the millions of dollars of inventory moving through the bays. Every single bolt, every piece of machinery, every flickering light bulb, it all belonged to me now. But I had to play the victim. News of the breakroom divorce ambush had spread through the facility like a virus over the weekend. When I walked down the main aisle, Coworkers actively avoided my gaze. People whispered behind pallets. Marcus, the older guy who had worked the loading docks for 20 years and the only man I considered a loyal ally, pulled me aside near the freight elevator. His face was lined with genuine concern. "Julian," Marcus said, keeping his voice low, glancing nervously toward the management offices above us. "You shouldn't be here today, man. Go home. Call in sick. Take some unpaid leave. Victor is out for blood. He's been pacing the catwalks all morning, looking for any excuse to write you up. He wants to finish the job he started on Friday." "I'm fine, Marcus," I said, forcing a weary smile and clapping him on the shoulder. "I need the paycheck. Just do your job. Keep your head down. Things are going to change around here soon. I promise." Marcus looked at me like the grief had finally fractured my sanity. But he nodded, strapped on his worn-out safety harness, and walked toward his forklift. About 3 hours into my shift, the abuse began. Victor assigned me the most grueling, physically punishing task in the building: manually unloading a full trailer of dense automotive parts because the automated conveyor was down for maintenance. I spent hours lifting heavy steel rotors, my back screaming in agony, sweat pouring down my face. Every time I looked up at the glass-walled management office on the second floor, Victor was standing there, holding a cup of coffee, looking down at me like I was an insect. By noon, I needed a management signature for a hazardous materials shipment. Standard protocol meant taking the clipboard up to the executive floor. It was Victor's territory. I walked up the metal-grated stairs. The air conditioning on the second floor was always freezing, a jarring contrast to the boiling, suffocating heat of the warehouse below. As I approached Victor's plush corner office, I noticed the heavy mahogany door was slightly ajar. I raised my knuckles to knock, but my hand froze in midair. I heard a voice inside, a familiar voice. It was Toby. Toby was a guy I had personally trained on the logistics software 2 years ago. I had covered his shifts when his kid was sick. I had loaned him money for gas. He was the same Toby who had stood in the break room on Friday, staring at the floor while my wife humiliated me. "I'm telling you, Victor," Toby was saying, his voice practically dripping with sleazy desperation. "Julian logged the inventory counts completely wrong on Bay 4 yesterday. He totally bypassed the scanning protocol. I saw him do it. If you pull the system logs from 3 p.m., you'll see the discrepancy. It's a massive safety violation. It's enough for a formal strike on his record." I stood perfectly still in the carpeted hallway, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the edges of the metal clipboard. Toby was actively selling me out. He was fabricating inventory errors, lying about safety violations, just to give Victor the formal ammunition needed to terminate me. "Excellent work, Toby," Victor's voice floated out, smooth, arrogant, and dripping with condescension. "You keep feeding me this kind of actionable intelligence, and that shift manager position is yours by the end of the quarter. I want Julian out of my building by Friday. The guy is a pathetic, depressing loser, and frankly, I'm tired of looking at his miserable face. Penelope is officially moving her things into my condo this weekend, and I don't want any loose ends dragging around my warehouse." "You got it, boss. Consider him gone," Toby chuckled, a sickening, sycophantic sound. I didn't storm in. I didn't kick the door open and scream. I didn't let the blinding rage take control. I stepped back silently. I walked silently down the hall to another manager's desk, got my necessary signature from an oblivious supervisor, and walked back down to the warehouse floor. The betrayal stung like acid, but it also clarified everything with absolute perfection. There were no innocent bystanders in this game anymore. Toby wanted a promotion built on my destruction. Victor wanted to humiliate me out of existence to satisfy his own massive ego and secure my wife. They were handing me the rope. All I had to do was let them tie the knot around their own necks. Later that evening, long after my shift ended, I sat in Mr. Harrison's downtown office. The city lights glowed fiercely through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Sitting next to Harrison was a man named Mr. Blackwood. Blackwood was an elite forensic corporate auditor. He looked like a man who spent his entire life staring at spreadsheets, finding the buried bodies in the numbers, and destroying lives with a calculator. "I want Victor's entire professional life dissected," I told Blackwood, tossing a file onto the table. "Every expense report, every vendor contract, every safety budget he's authorized for the last 5 years. I don't want a simple corporate review. I want a microscopic financial colonoscopy." He drives a new Porsche 911. He wears $5,000 custom suits. I know exactly what a regional director at Harwick makes, and the math doesn't add up. Blackwood pushed his thin glasses up his nose, his eyes gleaming with professional predatory interest. "If he is moving money, Mr. Dale, I will find it. Corporate embezzlement at the regional level always leaves a paper trail. People get greedy. They think they are smarter than the system. They get sloppy." "He's arrogant, which means he's sloppy," I confirmed. "And I want you to specifically check the safety compliance funds." Marcus, one of the veterans on the floor, has been filing complaints about a dangerous freight elevator and expired safety harnesses for 3 consecutive years. The budget for those replacements was approved by corporate headquarters twice, but the gear never arrived. Find out exactly where that money went. For the next 4 weeks, I lived a brutal double life. By day, I was Julian, the pathetic, broken warehouse worker. I let Victor write me up for the fake inventory errors Toby manufactured. I stood silently in Victor's freezing office with my hands clasped behind my back, while he screamed at me about professionalism and incompetence in front of the HR director. I took the verbal abuse. I let him think he was breaking me down to nothing. Every time he smirked, every time he casually, loudly mentioned a high-end Michelin star restaurant he was taking Penelope to that night, I just stared blankly at him, offering no reaction. By night, I sat at my kitchen table, drinking black coffee, reviewing the encrypted files Blackwood was secretly pulling from the corporate servers. The silent audit was turning up a staggering goldmine of corruption. Victor wasn't just a toxic boss, he was a full-blown corporate criminal. Blackwood discovered that Victor had set up a dummy vendor corporation registered under his brother-in-law's name in a different state. For 3 years, Victor had been systematically funneling maintenance and safety budgets directly into that ghost account, billing Harwick Distribution for structural repairs and safety equipment that were never actually rendered. That was how he bought the Porsche. That was how he afforded the massive condo. That was how he funded the elite country club lifestyle that Penelope's parents worshipped so deeply. He was funding his fake elite status with the money meant to keep my warehouse crew safe from injury and death. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying perfection. I had him dead to rights, but the sheer audacity of my soon-to-be ex-family wasn't quite finished with me yet. It was a rainy Tuesday evening in week 7 of the 90-day waiting period when my phone vibrated aggressively on the kitchen counter. I was deep into reviewing a particularly damning spreadsheet that Blackwood had just sent over, detailing Victor's fraudulent wire transfers to an offshore account. I glanced at the caller ID. Martha, my mother-in-law. I let it ring 3 times, taking a slow, deep breath to center myself before I swiped answer. "Hello, Martha," I said quietly. "Julian," she snapped. No greeting, no basic human warmth. Just the sharp, entitled, venomous tone of a woman who was entirely used to issuing commands and having the world bow to them. "I'm calling about the house." "What about it?" I asked, keeping my voice entirely flat, leaning back in my chair. "Penelope tells me you are being difficult and refusing to move out," Martha said, her voice dripping with extreme condescension. "Now, Julian, let's be reasonable adults here. You know perfectly well you cannot afford the rent on that place by yourself on your warehouse salary. Victor is a very generous, understanding man. He is willing to take over the lease officially so Penelope can keep the home she is comfortable in until they buy their own estate. It's the absolute least you can do, considering you have selfishly wasted the best years of my daughter's life." I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. The sheer, blinding delusion of this woman was staggering. She had actively facilitated her daughter's affair. She had pushed Penelope into the bed of a man she perceived as wealthy. And now, She wanted me to hand over the keys to my own home so Victor could literally play house in my living room. She wanted to erase me from existence. Victor is generous? I repeated, letting a dry, humorless chuckle escape my throat. Is that what you call it, Martha? Generosity. He provides, Julian, she fired back, her voice rising in pitch, offended by my tone. He drives a respectable, high-end car. He has an executive title that commands respect. He understands the kind of sophisticated lifestyle our family requires. You were always just a temporary fix. A mistake we tolerated because Penelope was young and foolish. Now do the right thing, pack your cheap bags, and leave. If you make this difficult, if you drag out this divorce, Victor will just fire you, and you will have absolutely nothing. She was explicitly threatening my job. She was using Victor's corporate authority as a weapon to extort me out of my house over the phone. It was beautiful. Every single word she spoke just justified the absolute hellfire I was about to rain down upon them. I'm not leaving the house, Martha, I said, staring directly at the stack of audit papers detailing Victor's multiple federal felonies. You are a stubborn, pathetic, jealous little boy, she hissed into the receiver. You are going to lose everything, Julian. Everything. You'll understand soon, I said, and I pressed end. I immediately went into my phone settings. I blocked Martha's number. I blocked Richard. I blocked Penelope. I didn't need to hear their toxic voices anymore. The time for talking, the time for enduring their abuse was officially over. The 90 days were up. The next morning, I called Mr. Harrison. Is the paperwork finalized? I asked, staring out the window at the gray sky. The transition documents are perfectly finalized, Julian, Harrison replied, his voice humming with anticipation. The board of directors for Harwick Group Holdings has convened for the massive quarterly executive review tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp at the downtown headquarters. Victor will be presenting his regional operations report to the entire board. And the audit? Mr. Blackwood has prepared 12 bound dossiers of the embezzlement findings, Harrison said, a hint of dark satisfaction in his usually sterile professional voice, complete with bank routing numbers, forged vendor invoices, and sworn affidavits from the dummy corporation owners. It is ironclad, Julian. He is facing massive civil liability and direct criminal referral to the federal authorities. Perfect, I said. I'll see you tomorrow. I hung up the phone. I walked upstairs to my bedroom closet. I reached past the faded blue, sweat-stained warehouse uniforms that defined my life for the last 5 years. I pulled out the dark navy, custom-tailored suit I had purchased 3 weeks ago. I remembered the day I bought it. I had walked into the most exclusive tailor in the city. The clerks had initially sneered at my worn-out shoes and calloused hands, ready to politely ask me to leave. Then I handed them a black card tied to the estate trust. The attitude shift was instantaneous. They spent 3 hours measuring me, fitting me, treating me like royalty. The suit was flawless. The fabric was heavy, expensive, and cut perfectly to my frame. It was not just clothing. It was armor. It was the armor of a man who was no longer asking for permission to exist in the world. I laid the suit out on the bed. I polished my leather Oxford shoes until they looked like black glass. I went into the bathroom, turned on the harsh overhead light, and looked at myself in the mirror. The exhausted, beaten down, terrified warehouse worker who had signed divorce papers in a dirty break room was dead. The man staring back at me in the mirror was cold, precise, wealthy beyond comprehension, and ready for absolute war. They thought my silence meant weakness. They thought my patience was cowardice. They thought a man who didn't scream, cry, or throw punches when he was stabbed in the back had no fight left in him. They were about to learn a very hard, very permanent lesson. The quietest people in the room are usually the ones holding all the cards. They don't scream because they are busy planning the funeral. Tomorrow morning, the storm was going to hit the 18th floor boardroom of Harwick Group Holdings. And Victor, Penelope, and her entire parasitic family were standing right on the main fault line. Let the games begin. It rained on the morning of the board meeting. I remember waking up at 5 a.m., long before my alarm was set to go off, just listening to the heavy drops hitting the roof of my rented house. It wasn't a soft, gentle, comforting rain. It was that particular driving, freezing November rain that comes off the lake and moves through the city streets with the specific intent of making everything gray, sharp, and brutally honest. It was the kind of weather that strips away whatever fake, polished version of yourself you are maintaining for the rest of the world and leaves only the raw truth underneath. Felt fitting. Today was the day the illusions were going to die. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror at 6:15 a.m. The house was completely silent. I looked at the face of a man who had worked grueling manual labor in a concrete warehouse for years. I looked at the calluses on my hands, the permanent dark circles under my eyes from working overtime to fund a life my wife didn't even appreciate. But the man staring back at me wasn't the broken, humiliated husband who had signed divorce papers in a dirty break room. I felt something I didn't have a precise name for. It wasn't excitement. My heart wasn't racing. It certainly wasn't anger anymore. Anger is a hot, chaotic emotion. Anger makes you make mistakes. What I felt was something quieter, deeper, and infinitely more dangerous. It was the specific internal stillness that comes when you have completely finished preparing, the traps are all perfectly set, the legal documents are signed, and the only thing left to do is walk into the room and pull the trigger. I walked into my bedroom and put on the dark navy bespoke suit I had purchased 3 weeks ago. The fabric was heavy, expensive Italian wool. It fit my shoulders perfectly. I tied a silk tie. I slipped on the custom leather Oxfords that shone like black glass. I grabbed a heavy black umbrella and walked out the front door, leaving my old beat-up, 10-year-old truck parked in the driveway. Today, I was taking the private town car service Mr. Harrison had arranged for me. The ride into the downtown financial district was silent. I watched the city wake up through the tinted windows. I watched people waiting at bus stops, holding cheap umbrellas, holding their coffees, bracing themselves for another day of the corporate grind. I used to be one of them. I knew exactly how heavy their boots felt. We pulled up to the Harwick Group Holdings corporate tower. It was a massive, imposing structure of steel and heavily tinted glass that dominated the downtown skyline. I stepped out of the car, closed my umbrella, and walked through the heavy revolving doors into the sprawling marble lobby. The air inside was climate-controlled to absolute perfection, carrying the faint, expensive scent of artisan coffee and industrial floor wax. I approached the main security desk. Hank, a veteran guard in his late 50s who I had seen a few times when I had to deliver logistical paperwork from the warehouse, was working the main manifest. He was a good guy, the kind of guy who kept his head down and did his job to pay his mortgage. He looked up as I approached, his eyes automatically doing the standard threat assessment scan, checking my suit, my posture, before finally landing on my face. Took him a second. His brain struggled violently to reconcile the Julian he knew. The guy in the dusty blue uniform smelling like diesel, with the man standing in front of him in a suit that cost more than a reliable used car. "Name?" Hank asked, his voice rough, his eyes narrowing slightly as he tried to place me. "Julian Dale," I said evenly. I hadn't used my uncle's surname in years. I always used my father's name, Holloway. But today, the Dale name was my shield, my sword, and my absolute authority. Hank ran his finger down the printed VIP visitor list on his clipboard. He stopped at the very top, right under the bold, underlined heading, Ownership Transition and Strategic Executive Review. His thick finger hovered over the name Julian Dale, listed directly next to the title, Majority Shareholder and Incoming Chairman. Hank's head snapped up so fast I thought he might hurt his neck. His eyes widened comically, darting from the high-security badge printer to my face, his professional composure completely cracking for just a second. The dawning awareness hit him like a physical blow to the chest. He realized the guy from the loading dock, the guy Victor treated like absolute garbage, was suddenly at the very top of the corporate food chain. "Good morning, Mr. Dale," Hank said, his voice completely changing tone. He lost the gruff security edge instantly, replacing it with absolute, genuine deference. His hands were actually shaking slightly as he printed the elite black and gold access badge and handed it to me with both hands. "They are They are expecting you on the 18th floor, sir. The executive boardroom is prepped. Have a great day, Mr. Dale. Thank you, Hank. Keep up the good work. I appreciate what you do here, I replied, clipping the heavy badge to my lapel. I swiped my badge at the private executive elevator bank. The glass doors slid open, and I rode up alone. The silence in the cab was deafening. I watched the floor numbers tick up. 10, 12, 15, 18. The doors slid open with a soft chime. The 18th floor was a different world. Thick, sound-absorbing carpet, modern art on the walls, and expansive views of the city. Diana, the executive receptionist who had spent the last 3 years watching Victor aggressively scream at me over minor inventory delays, was sitting at the massive front desk. She looked up from her computer. Her jaw literally dropped. She recognized me instantly, but just like Hank, she couldn't process the visual information. She opened her mouth to ask what a warehouse worker was doing on the executive floor, but her eyes caught the black and gold chairman's badge on my lapel. I gave her a polite, silent nod, didn't say a single word, and walked directly down the plush hallway toward the main double doors of the boardroom. The boardroom was a massive, intimidating space. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls on 2 sides offered a panoramic, rain-swept view of the entire city skyline. A long, polished mahogany table dominated the room, surrounded by 12 high-backed, ergonomic leather chairs. Water glasses, legal pads, and bound corporate agendas were placed with geometric perfection at every single seat. I was the last to arrive. I didn't walk fast. I didn't kick the heavy oak doors open or announce myself loudly. I simply entered the room the way a man enters a room that belongs entirely to him, with the unhurried, terrifying certainty of someone who doesn't need to make an entrance because his mere presence alters the absolute gravity of the space. Mr. Harrison was already there, standing quietly near the head of the table, holding his thick leather binder. I saw Victor before he saw me. Victor was seated about 2/3 of the way down the massive table, holding court exactly like the arrogant king he thought he was. He had his custom, $5,000 jacket draped with deliberate, practiced casualness across the back of his chair. He was leaning in, talking to the chief financial officer and the VP of marketing, flashing that arrogant, bleached white smile. He was projecting the image of the golden boy who had the corporate world on a string. He looked like a man who firmly believed his promotion to senior vice president was a mere formality today. He was likely already thinking about the celebratory dinner he was going to buy my wife with stolen money. Then his peripheral vision caught movement near the door. Victor turned his head. Full recognition took about 3 agonizingly slow seconds. First came the automatic, dismissive sweep he gave everyone who walked through a door, the look of a man constantly grading the wealth and importance of everyone around him. Then came the double take. I could literally see the neural misfire happening in real time behind his eyes. His posture stiffened. His smile froze, then slowly melted off his face. His brain was screaming a dozen questions at once. Why is the pathetic warehouse floor supervisor standing in the executive boardroom? Why is he wearing a bespoke suit that costs more than my own? Why is the elite, terrifyingly powerful estate attorney, Mr. Harrison, stepping aside and gesturing for him to take the chairman's seat at the absolute head of the table? The blood completely drained from Victor's face. The smug, country club tan vanished in an instant, replaced by a sickly, chalky, terrifying white. He looked like he was about to vomit. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. It wasn't a loud sound, but it carried absolute authority. The low hum of executive chatter, the fake laughs, the corporate small talk in the room died instantly. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, Harrison began, his voice echoing with the measured, heavy, undeniable cadence of a man about to drop a nuclear bomb on a spreadsheet. Thank you for gathering this morning for this emergency session. Before we begin the quarterly operational review, I have the distinct privilege of formally introducing Julian Dale, the sole heir to the estate of Raymond Dale, and the new majority controlling shareholder of Harwick Group Holdings. Harrison paused. He let the silence stretch. He let the words hang in the freezing air of the room until they became suffocating. Effective as of this exact moment, Harrison concluded, turning and gesturing to me. Your new chairman of the board. The silence that followed was not polite. It was not respectful. It was the specific, heavy, terrifying silence of 12 incredibly powerful, wealthy individuals simultaneously running the math in their heads, realizing the power dynamic of their entire corporate universe had just flipped completely upside down, and trying to figure out if their jobs were safe. Victor pushed back from the table. His chair scraped violently, loudly against the floor. That is not possible, Victor choked out. His voice cracked. It lost all of its polished, dominant executive resonance. He sounded like a terrified little boy. He looked around the room frantically, locking eyes with the CEO. This is a joke. This is some kind of sick prank. He works for me. He moves boxes on my warehouse floor. He's a nobody. He makes $20 an hour. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't glare. I didn't let any emotion show on my face. I walked slowly to the head of the table, unbuttoned my suit jacket with deliberate slowness, and sat down in the chairman's chair. I folded my hands on the polished mahogany wood. I looked directly into Victor's panicked eyes. I did work for you, Victor, I said, my voice carrying clearly and smoothly across the massive room. Now, please sit down, close your mouth, and remain completely quiet while I conduct my board meeting. Victor's mouth opened and closed like a dying fish on a dock. He looked at the CEO again, desperately expecting backup, expecting the corporate machine to protect him. But the CEO simply looked away, adjusting his tie, already reading the room and siding with the man who owned 63% of the stock. Nobody was going to save him. Victor sat down slowly, heavily, collapsing into his chair like a man whose legs had just been completely cut off at the knees. Over the past 90 days, I began, opening the thick, leather-bound folder Mr. Blackwood had prepared for me, the sound of the leather cracking slightly in the silent room. I authorized a fully independent, covert, forensic audit of every single operational division under the Harwick Group umbrella. I want to be extremely direct about what my investigative team found, because absolute directness is the only thing that serves the shareholders in this room today. I picked up a small remote from the table and clicked it. The massive projector screen behind me hummed as it lowered from the ceiling and lit up. Harwick Distribution, the logistics subsidiary that Mr. Victor handles as regional director, is by a massive, catastrophic margin the most compromised, corrupt entity in this entire corporate portfolio, I stated coldly. The first slide flashed on the screen. It was a highly detailed financial flowchart. It showed Victor's regional safety budget. It showed the exact, date-stamped wire transfers moving from Harwick corporate accounts directly into a dummy vendor corporation registered in Nevada. The name on the LLC documents was explicitly linked to Victor's brother-in-law. A collective, audible gasp echoed in the room. The chief financial officer, a stern woman in her 60s, leaned forward, her face turning crimson with absolute fury. Embezzlement was one thing, but leaving a multi-million-dollar logistics company exposed to massive federal OSHA liabilities by stealing safety funds was corporate suicide. As you can clearly see, I continued, my voice unwavering, clicking to the next slide, which displayed bank routing numbers, forged vendor invoices, and sworn, notarized affidavits from the fake contractors. Victor has been systematically embezzling corporate funds for the last 3 years to finance a luxury lifestyle, including high-end real estate leases and exotic vehicles. He stole the money meant to keep our warehouse workers alive. Victor slammed both of his hands on the table. The sudden noise made the VP of marketing jump. "This is a lie," Victor shouted, his face red, sweating profusely. "These numbers are manipulated. You don't understand the operational complexities of regional logistics. You are misinterpreting standard budget reallocation protocols." "I understand them intimately, Victor," I replied, staring a hole directly through his skull. "I understand that you explicitly approved a personal performance bonus for yourself of $42,000 just 11 days after you officially denied a replacement safety harness order for the floor team. An order that Marcus, a 20-year veteran of this company, submitted for 3 consecutive years because the current harnesses were literally fraying at the seams. The room was so quiet you could hear the rain hitting the glass outside. You could hear Victor's heavy, panicked breathing. Victor realized the corporate shield was completely gone. He realized the math was undeniable. He resorted to the absolute only tactic he had left: desperate personal attacks. "This is personal," Victor shouted, pointing a visibly shaking finger at me from across the table. "He's doing this because his wife left him for me. This is revenge. He's using this board, he's using all of you, to settle a domestic dispute because he couldn't keep his own wife happy." I looked at him. I didn't interrupt him. I let the silence hang for a long, terrible, agonizing moment, letting his pathetic, unprofessional outburst echo in the ears of the highly conservative executives sitting around the table. They looked at him with sheer disgust. "No, Victor," I said softly, the absolute coldness in my voice freezing the air in the room. "This is not revenge. My divorce is a completely separate, private matter, one I am very grateful for, as it removed a parasite from my life. What is happening right now in this room is what absolute accountability looks like when the right person finally gets the authority to demand it." I closed the leather folder with a sharp, final snap that sounded like a gunshot. "Victor," I announced, turning my gaze to the CEO and the head of corporate HR to ensure they were executing my orders. "Your employment with Harwick Group Holdings is terminated, effective immediately, for cause. You are permanently barred from all company premises globally. Your corporate access credentials, your company phone, your expense accounts, and your laptop are revoked as of this exact second. Your executive severance package is completely voided due to the gross negligence and felony cause provisions deeply embedded in your contract." Victor stared at me, his eyes hollow, his mouth slightly open. "Furthermore," I continued, driving the final nail into the coffin, "Mr. Harrison has already forwarded this entire, unredacted dossier to federal prosecutors and our internal corporate litigation team. We are filing a massive civil lawsuit against you today to recover the stolen funds, and we fully expect the FBI to press criminal charges for wire fraud and corporate embezzlement by the end of the week." Victor stood up. He tried to speak. He tried to formulate a defense, an apology, a threat, anything. But no words came out. He was completely, utterly ruined. His career, his fake wealth, his freedom, his pristine country club reputation. Gone in less than 20 minutes. "Security is waiting outside the door," I said, gesturing toward the heavy oak entrance. "They will escort you to the street. You will not be permitted to clear out your office. Anything personal will be mailed to you after it is thoroughly searched for stolen company property. Have a nice life." The doors opened. 2 massive corporate security guards stepped into the boardroom. Victor looked at them. He looked at the board members who were actively, intentionally avoiding eye contact with him. Finally, he looked at me. The absolute, unadulterated terror in his eyes was the most satisfying, deeply vindicating thing I had ever seen in my entire life. He turned and walked out, his expensive leather shoes echoing hollowly on the floor, flanked by guards like a dead man walking to the gallows. The boardroom meeting concluded 90 minutes later. The executives were terrified, compliant, and eager to prove their loyalty to the new regime. We passed a unanimous resolution formalizing the ownership transition and immediately authorizing a massive operational overhaul of the warehouse facilities. I ordered the CFO to release the emergency funds for the safety equipment before anyone went to lunch. I rode the private elevator down to the lobby alone. The adrenaline was slowly leaving my system, replaced by a profound, heavy, beautiful sense of peace. The universe had finally balanced the scales. I was sitting in the back of my hired car, watching the rain wash the slick city streets, feeling the soft leather of the seats, when my phone vibrated violently in my suit pocket. I pulled it out. Penelope. She had been blocked, but she had obviously found a way around it, likely using a cheap burner phone or borrowing a friend's device. I debated ignoring it. I didn't owe her anything, but I realized I needed to close this loop permanently. I needed her to hear the absolute truth from my mouth before I shut the door on her forever. I swiped answer and put the phone to my ear. "Julian?" She practically screamed into the phone. She wasn't using her rehearsed, calm, superior divorce voice today. She sounded unhinged, frantic, and entirely out of control. "What did you do? What the hell did you just do?" "I attended a morning meeting, Penelope," I replied calmly, watching a city bus roll by through the tinted window. "Don't play games with me, Julian," Penelope shrieked, her voice shrill and panicked. "Victor just called me from the sidewalk. He was hyperventilating. He said you had him escorted out of the building by armed security. He said you humiliated him in front of the entire corporate board and claimed you fired him. He said you're trying to frame him for stealing millions of dollars. Have you completely lost your mind? I'm calling the police." I let her rant. I let her exhaust her oxygen. It was incredible how fiercely she still defended the illusion of the man she thought Victor was. She still thought I was the weak, pathetic warehouse worker throwing a tantrum. "Victor was terminated for cause, Penelope," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion, speaking to her like I was reading a weather report. "It is heavily documented. He embezzled millions of dollars from the safety budgets meant to protect the workers on the floor. He committed federal wire fraud. Our legal department is seizing his bank accounts right now to recover the stolen funds, and he will likely be federally indicted by the end of the month. I didn't frame him. I simply handed the forensic math to the board of directors. You don't have the authority to do any of that," she yelled, though I could hear the first sliver of terrifying doubt creeping into her voice. "You're a warehouse worker. You move boxes for $20 an hour. Victor is an executive. He runs the region." "Not anymore," I said smoothly. "And I don't move boxes anymore either. I own the box." Silence hung on the line, just the faint, static sound of her ragged, uneven breathing. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. The venom was completely gone, replaced by raw, creeping, paralyzing confusion. "My Uncle Raymond died a few months ago," I explained slowly, using small, deliberate words so she could fully digest the absolute reality of her colossal mistake. "He left his entire estate to me. The total inheritance is roughly $470 million. Among those massive assets is a 63% controlling equity stake in Harwick Group Holdings. I am the chairman of the board. I own the company Penelope. I own the building Victor used to work in. I own the chair he used to sit in. I own his salary." I heard a sharp, painful intake of breath. The silence on her end stretched for so long I thought the call had dropped. I could practically hear the gears grinding in her head, the sudden, horrifying realization of what she had just thrown away and what she had permanently tied herself to instead. You own the company?" she stammered, her voice shaking violently, the reality crushing her lungs. "Since when? How long have you known this?" "I found out the exact same day you handed me the divorce papers in the break room," I said, delivering the final, crushing blow without an ounce of sympathy. "I found the lawyer's letter on the kitchen counter when I got home from being publicly humiliated by you and your boyfriend. I've known for 3 months. I just waited for the right time to use it." You could have told me," she cried. The tears were real now, but they weren't tears of guilt. They weren't tears of regret for breaking my heart. They were tears of pure, unadulterated financial grief. She was mourning the absolute loss of the generational wealth she had just missed out on by mere hours. "Julian, we are still legally married. The divorce isn't finalized yet. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. I made a terrible mistake. I was just confused. Victor manipulated me." "You weren't confused, Penelope," I said, feeling absolutely nothing for the pathetic woman crying on the other end of the line. "You were incredibly clear about what you wanted. You wanted a man who drove a Porsche and wore expensive suits. You wanted the illusion of status. You left me because you thought I was a dead end. You don't get to come crawling back just because you found out the dead end was actually a gold mine. Julian, please, I am begging you." I told Mr. Harrison and my legal team to aggressively expedite the divorce proceedings. I interrupted, cutting her off. Because of the undeniable infidelity clauses, the pre-existing debt you hid from me, and the exact legal timeline of the inheritance trust, my legal team has assured me you are legally entitled to absolutely nothing from the estate. You get half of the $22 that was left in our joint checking account. Enjoy your new life with Victor, assuming he doesn't go to federal prison. Don't ever call me again. I hung up the phone. I blocked that burner number. I told my lawyers to handle any future communication. Later that afternoon, the real shift in power manifested where it actually mattered to me. On the concrete warehouse floor. I wasn't there to see it, but Marcus called me around 4 p.m. "Julian," Marcus said, his gruff voice a mix of awe, shock, and deep, profound respect. "Man, I don't even know what to call you anymore." "Sir? Mr. Chairman?" I laughed softly, feeling the tension bleed out of my shoulders. "Julian is fine, Marcus. What's going on down there?" "A massive corporate delivery truck just backed into Bay 2, Marcus said, and I could hear the genuine emotion choking his throat. This was a man who had risked his life for this company. They unloaded 14 pallets of brand new safety equipment. State-of-the-art harnesses, steel-reinforced cables, new hard hats, high-visibility gear, the works. And a massive corporate maintenance crew just showed up to completely rebuild the freight elevator. We haven't seen this kind of investment in 5 years. Guys are actually crying down here, man. "You guys earned it," I said. "It was long overdue. Nobody should have to risk their life for a paycheck." "There's something else," Marcus added, lowering his voice. "Corporate HR came down about an hour ago with 2 security guards. They marched straight to Toby's station. They packed up his locker. Turns out they pulled the security footage and the system logs and caught him blatantly falsifying inventory records to frame other workers, including you. They escorted him out of the building. And HR pulled me into the office. They offered me the shift supervisor position, with a massive raise. Said the order came directly from the chairman's desk." "Congratulations, Marcus," I said, smiling at the city passing by my window. "You're going to be a great boss. You look out for your guys. Just don't let the clipboard go to your head." "Thank you, Julian," Marcus said quietly, his voice thick with gratitude, "for everything. You saved us." I hung up the phone. The feeling in my chest was indescribable. It wasn't the thrill of having hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank. Money is just paper and digits on a screen. The real thrill, the actual tangible world-shifting power, was the ability to reach down into the dirt, pull up a fundamentally good man like Marcus, and simultaneously crush the corrupt parasites who made their living stepping on the necks of others. Fast forward 6 months. Time is the ultimate truth serum, and it moves with an unhurried, ruthless, agonizing pace when it comes to delivering consequences to people who deserve them. Without Victor's inflated, 6-figure executive salary and the massive influx of stolen corporate infrastructure funds, the glamorous, elite, untouchable lifestyle he and Penelope had constructed began its rapid, violent, highly public contraction. It was like watching a hot air balloon catch fire in midair and slowly plummet to the earth. The first massive domino to fall was the real estate. The luxury downtown condo they had hastily moved into together, the one Penelope had bragged to her mother about, became financially impossible within 6 short weeks. Without Harwick's accounts to bleed dry, Victor was just an unemployed, disgraced man in his mid-40s with a highly toxic reputation and pending federal charges. They were evicted. Then came the vehicles. That was the third, beautiful, deeply satisfying twist in this entire saga. Victor's wealth, the wealth that Richard and Martha had literally worshipped at the Thanksgiving table, the wealth that Penelope had actively destroyed her 5-year marriage to attain, was entirely a mirage. It was a hollow shell built on debt and crime. The gleaming Porsche 911 wasn't paid off. It was leased under an incredibly predatory financing agreement. When Victor missed 3 consecutive payments because his bank accounts were frozen by federal investigators, the repo men showed up. I heard through the grapevine that the tow truck arrived in the middle of the night at the cheap apartment complex they had been forced to move into. The neighbors came out to watch. Victor was outside in his bathrobe, screaming at the tow truck driver, while Penelope watched from the window. The civil claims from Harwick Group Holdings hit him next, hitting him like a freight train. Our corporate lawyers dragged him into court, completely exposing his dummy corporations to the public record. The FBI officially took over the wire fraud investigation, and Victor spent every remaining dime he could beg or borrow on criminal defense attorneys just to avoid a lengthy stretch in federal prison. The logistics industry completely blacklisted him. Men like Victor cultivate loyalty based solely on their proximity to power and money. Once the power and the money vanish, that loyalty evaporates instantly. Nobody returned his calls. And true to their parasitic form, Richard and Martha, the ultimate social climbers, dropped Victor the absolute second they realized he was totally broke and facing federal charges. They didn't care about his character. They never did. They only cared about his credit score and his ability to buy their daughter expensive things. When that tanked, they turned on him viciously, blaming him for ruining their precious golden child's life. They actually tried to pressure Penelope to sue Victor for emotional distress, completely ignoring her own willing role in the infidelity. But worse than that, they refused to let Penelope move back into their sprawling house. Martha claimed that Penelope's highly public scandal and impending poverty was too embarrassing for them to explain to their friends at the country club. They abandoned their own daughter the second she was no longer a status symbol. It all culminated on a Tuesday afternoon in early May. I was driving my new car, a sleek, midnight black Rolls-Royce Ghost. It was quiet, incredibly powerful, and commanded the road without having to make a single loud sound. I was cruising down the Pacific Coast Highway, miles and miles away from the dirty warehouse, enjoying the warm sunshine reflecting off the ocean water, when a number I didn't recognize popped up on the dashboard console. I tapped the sleek screen to answer. Julian. It was Penelope. Her voice was thin, raspy, exhausted, and completely stripped of the arrogant, entitled polish she used to wear like armor. Who is this? I asked, looking out at the ocean. I knew exactly who it was. I just wanted her to say it. I wanted to hear her admit it. It's Penelope, she whispered, sounding on the absolute verge of a total psychological breakdown. Please don't hang up. Please, Julian. Just give me 2 minutes. That's all I ask. I eased the heavy Rolls-Royce around a curve, listening to the powerful, silent hum of the engine. You have 60 seconds. Make them count. I made a mistake, she cried, the tears flowing freely, loudly over the phone. There was no rehearsal in this call, no mirror practice, just the exhausted, desperate honesty of a woman who had run out of alternative plans and victims to latch onto. I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me. Victor. Victor is a monster. He lied about everything. He's totally broke. He yells at me every day. My own parents won't even let me move back into their house because they are embarrassed by me. I'm living in a cheap motel by the highway, Julian. I have nothing. I can't afford groceries. Please. I know you have the money now. I know you're the chairman. I'm begging you. Can we just meet for coffee? Can we just talk? I'm so sorry. I let the heavy silence sit between us, listening to her sob into the receiver. Some things deserve room to breathe. I thought about the break room. I thought about the $4 sandwich that the machine stole. I thought about the Thanksgiving dinners where she let her father humiliate me, where she chose a fake Porsche over a loyal husband. You didn't make a mistake, Penelope? I said, my voice incredibly calm, completely devoid of anger, pity, or love. A mistake is forgetting to pay the electric bill. A mistake is taking the wrong exit on the highway. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. She gasped, trying to interrupt, desperate to change the narrative. Julian, I was manipulated. He tricked me. You made a conscious, deliberate, extended choice to betray me. I continued, cutting her off cleanly and surgically. You chose to have an affair for months. You chose to bring your lover to my workplace to publicly, intentionally humiliate me in front of my coworkers. You chose a man based on a fake leased car and a stolen bank account. Everything that is happening to you right now, the cheap motel, the scandal, the poverty, your parents abandoning you, it isn't bad luck. It is simply the exact shape that your choices took. You built this house, brick by brick. Now you have to live in it. I love you, she screamed desperately, her voice cracking. No, you don't, I said softly. You love the Rolls-Royce I'm driving right now. You love the chairman title. You love the bank account. But the man you married? The man in the steel-toed boots who worked himself to the bone for you? You never loved him. And the man I am now doesn't even remember your face. I reached forward and pressed the red button on the console, ending the call permanently. I didn't block the new number. I didn't need to. I knew she would never call again. The reality of her absolute, irreversible defeat had finally set in. I rolled down the window, letting the salty ocean breeze fill the luxurious cabin of the car, and drove toward my new estate. Later that evening, I stood on the massive, private stone balcony of my new corporate executive office, looking out over the city as the sun began to set. The sprawling skyline was painted in brilliant, fiery shades of orange and deep purple. Millions of lights were turning on in the buildings below, representing millions of lives, millions of daily struggles, and millions of untold stories. I held a glass of incredibly expensive, aged bourbon, feeling the heavy, cold crystal in my hand, and allowed myself a rare moment of deep, profound reflection. I thought about what I would tell a younger version of myself, or what I would tell another man or another woman standing in a dirty break room right now, staring at a vending machine that just stole their last few dollars, watching the life they thought they had walk in wearing clothes they don't recognize, standing next to a boss who wanted to destroy them. Look, I know a lot of you watching this have been the one pulling the weight. You've been the one working the double shifts, skipping your own lunch breaks so your kids could have new shoes, or your spouse could buy that thing they just had to have. You know exactly what it feels like to be completely invisible in your own home. Here is what I would tell you. The thing that nearly destroyed my soul wasn't the divorce papers. It wasn't Victor standing in that doorway with his arrogant, punchable smirk. It wasn't Penelope's cold, dead eyes looking at me like I was garbage. And it certainly wasn't the 5 long years of brutal overtime, physical pain, and strategic deferral that nobody in my family ever noticed or rewarded. The thing that nearly destroyed me was the internal story I had been telling myself about what those things meant. For years, I firmly believed that my quietness meant I was invisible. I believed that my patience was a symptom of powerlessness. I believed that because I didn't make noise, because I didn't scream back at Richard during those awful Thanksgiving dinners, because I didn't throw punches at Victor in the warehouse and get myself arrested, I was fundamentally weak. I had fully convinced myself that a man who doesn't roar when he is wounded is a man who has surrendered to the world. That story was entirely, fundamentally, dangerously wrong. Power isn't volume. Power isn't the man in the $5,000 jacket standing in a doorway with his arms crossed, demanding a reaction from you. That is just deep, pathetic insecurity dressed up in a tailored suit. Real power, the durable, terrifying, world-changing kind of power, the kind that shifts the earth and alters destinies, is the ability to wait. It is the absolute discipline to hold your fire until the room is perfectly set, until the trap is completely closed, and then walking to the head of the boardroom table without breaking your stride. I didn't miraculously become a powerful man the moment I signed my name on Mr. Harrison's legal inheritance documents. The money gave me leverage, yes. It gave me a weapon. But I became a powerful man in that parking lot, sitting in my beat-up truck with exactly 11 minutes on the dashboard clock, with absolutely nothing left to lose, when I made the conscious, deliberate decision that I was not going to respond to their chaos with more noise. What Victor never understood about men like me, men who work double shifts in heavy boots, men who process the brutal reality of the world through grind and grit, men who sign for divorce papers in total silence rather than giving an audience a free, dramatic show, is that we are not invisible because we are weak. We are invisible because we are exceptionally, dangerously patient. And patience, when it finally decides to move, does not announce itself with sirens. It doesn't scream. It doesn't throw tantrums. It just shows up at the head of the table, already seated, already decided, with the paperwork signed and the lawyers ready, calmly wondering why it took everyone else so long to catch up to the reality of their own destruction. Penelope handed me those divorce papers like I was the pathetic end of a sad story. What she didn't know was that she had handed them to a man who already owned the entire universe she thought she was running toward. She found out eventually, but by the time she realized it, I was already somewhere completely out of her reach. I am Julian. I built a new life, not just on the financial foundation of my uncle's wealth, but on the unshakable, concrete foundation of my own boundaries. I protect the people who stood by me in the dark, like Marcus, and I have absolutely zero space, zero tolerance, and zero oxygen in my life for anyone who only wants to stand next to me when I am in the light. I have found my true purpose, and I guard my peace with the absolute ferocity of a man who knows exactly what it costs to lose it. Thank you for letting me share my deeply personal story with you today. Sometimes, the absolute hardest, most painful chapters of our lives are really just the prologue to the incredible, satisfying justice waiting for us on the very next page. Never, ever let anyone convince you that your patience is a weakness. Never let toxic family members dictate your worth based on their shallow, parasitic standards. Establish your boundaries, hold your ground, and when the absolute perfect time is right, take your seat at the head of the table. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to deal with the toxic, blinding arrogance of a partner, an in-law or a boss who thought they could walk all over you, only for you to have the final, silent, ultimate laugh? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Until next time, stay strong, stay patient, and vigorously protect your peace.